Hello, this short presentation is going to look at qualitative education research. And in doing this, it's useful to bear in mind the words of Lawrence Stenhouse in 1975, who said that curriculum research and development ought to belong to the teacher, and we might also extend that to include other professionals who work within education and training. And his key idea here was that professionals within that field, and in particular teachers and other educators, need to research their own practice, to look at the impact of their own practice on their own learners and on their own environments and institutions, and that the research should generate findings that then enlighten that professional's continuing practice within the same or a related environment, and that all of that research, as well as feeding into the individual's own practice, can also enlighten others who work in a similar field. And further than this, what Stenhouse said was that it's not enough that teachers' work should be studied, but that it needs to be studied by teachers themselves. And that's a really important tenet, that those who are most involved in the delivery of education are actually best placed to do the research into it. And of course, that covers all of us in some way or other. Now, really the key thing to note about educational research is that any claims that you make coming out of that research need to be very firmly grounded in your data. And it's useful at this point to think about where else your claims might come from. If they're not coming from your data, where else might they arise? And that's an interesting question for you to reflect upon. But the key thing then, of course, about data is that it needs to be reliable, valid data. And that means that you need well-constructed instruments for collecting your data. And that's where some of the research expertise comes in. But another key area surrounding educational research in particular, and all research for that matter, is that it should be enlightened by an ethical approach. And that means care of your participants and care about your outcomes. And your research needs to be ethical in both those ways, so that when you unpack it and when you look in detail at what your research is, enlightened by an ethical approach, you should be able to label it as both moral and rigorous.